The gunshot echoed through Willow Creek like thunder on a clear day, turning every head on Main Street toward the commotion at the Silver Spur Saloon. Ruby Winters, not yet 18 but with eyes that had seen a lifetime of sorrow, stumbled against the saloon's swinging doors, her right eye swollen shut, and her tattered dress stained with blood that wasn't entirely her own. It was 1876, a hard year in the Montana Territory where the law stretched thin across vast distances, leaving folks to their own devices and sometimes to their own demise. Ruby clutched her side, the pain from her broken ribs making each breath a labor as she scanned the dusty street for any sign of salvation. Wade Armstrong had just tied his stallion to the hitching post outside the Silver Spur when the girl came stumbling out. At 30, Wade had spent more than half his life in the saddle, riding with cattle drives from Texas to Montana, his reputation as a fair but fierce cowboy preceding him across the frontier. The scars on his weather-beaten face told tales of bar fights and stampedes, but nothing prepared him for the sight of the bloodied girl who now collapsed at his boots. "Please," Ruby whispered, her voice barely audible over the piano music spilling from the saloon. "He's going to kill me." Her fingers, thin and trembling, reached for Wade's dusty boot. Wade crouched down, his blue eyes narrowing as he assessed her injuries. Without a moment's hesitation, he scooped her up into his arms, cradling her against his chest as if she weighed no more than a newborn calf. "You're mine now," he said, his voice low and steady, a promise of protection that made Ruby's eyes widen with hope and fear intermingled. "Ain't nobody going to hurt you anymore." As if summoned by those words, a red-faced man burst through the saloon doors, a revolver in his meaty hand and murder in his bloodshot eyes. "That's my property you're holding, cowboy," he snarled, spittle flying from his lips. Wade shifted Ruby to one arm, his other hand moving to the Colt on his hip with practiced ease. "I reckon not," he replied, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent street. "She's under my protection now. You'd best be on your way if you want to see tomorrow's sunrise." The standoff lasted 3 heartbeats before the drunk man's nerve broke. He spat on the ground and holstered his weapon. "Keep the whore," he muttered. "She wasn't worth the trouble anyhow." Wade didn't bother to reply, already turning toward the doctor's office at the end of the street, Ruby's fragile form trembling against him. Dr. Emmett Lowell had been Willow Creek's physician for over 20 years, treating everything from gunshot wounds to childbirth complications. His hands, steady despite his advancing age, worked efficiently as he examined Ruby's injuries while Wade paced the small waiting room. 3 broken ribs, that eye's going to be swollen for a week, and she's got bruises older than the ones you can see, Dr. Lowell reported when he finally emerged. "She'll heal, but she needs rest and care and safety." The last word was pointed, his gaze fixed on Wade. "She'll have it," Wade assured him, his hat in his hands. "I've got a cabin outside town. Nobody will bother her there." The doctor's eyebrow rose skeptically. "And what exactly are your intentions with this girl, Armstrong?" "She can't be more than I gave her my word," Wade interrupted, his voice sharp. "That's all you need to know." Dr. Lowell studied him for a long moment before nodding. "She can leave tomorrow morning." "I want to keep her under observation tonight." Wade placed a few coins on the doctor's desk. "I'll be back at dawn." True to his word, Wade returned as the first light of day painted the eastern sky. Ruby was awake, sitting on the edge of the examination table, her bruised face partially hidden by her long auburn hair. She flinched when Wade entered, then relaxed slightly when she recognized him. "Thank you," she said softly, "for yesterday. But you don't have to trouble yourself further." "I can manage." Wade leaned against the doorframe, studying her. "Where would you go?" Ruby's silence was answer enough. "I've got a place," Wade continued. "It's nothing fancy, but it's quiet, safe. You can stay until you're healed up and figure out your next steps." He paused. "No strings attached." Ruby looked up, meeting his gaze with her one good eye. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Wade's expression remained unreadable. Let's just say I've seen enough people looking the other way in my lifetime. I'm not aiming to be one of them. The ride to Wade's cabin took nearly 2 hours, with Ruby seated in front of him on the saddle, her body tense every time they hit a rough patch of trail. The cabin itself sat nestled against a stand of pines, with a small creek burbling nearby and mountains rising in the distance. It was simple but solid, with a stone chimney and a small corral for Wade's horses. "It's not much," Wade said as he helped Ruby down from the horse, "but it keeps the rain out and the warmth in." Inside, the cabin was unexpectedly tidy, with a table and chairs, a stone fireplace, and a bed in one corner. Animal pelts covered the plank floor, and a bookshelf held more volumes than Ruby would have expected from a cowboy. "You can take the bed," Wade said, setting her small bag down. "I'll sleep by the fire." Ruby stood awkwardly in the center of the room. "I don't want to put you out of your own bed," Wade shook his head. "It's no trouble, you need the rest more than I do." The first few days established a cautious rhythm. Wade would rise before dawn, tend to his horses and the small garden plot behind the cabin, then prepare a simple breakfast before Ruby awoke. They spoke little, each wary in their own way. Ruby helped with what chores she could manage, despite Wade's insistence that she rest, and spent hours sitting on the cabin's porch, watching the wilderness around them. On the 4th day, as Wade chopped wood near the edge of the clearing, Ruby finally began to talk. "My pa died when I was 12, she said, her voice carrying across the yard. "Mining accident up in the Black Hills. Ma tried to keep us going, but there were 5 of us kids and not enough work for a woman with no skills beyond keeping house." Wade set down his axe and listened, his expression somber. "She remarried when I was 14. Thomas Wells." Ruby's voice hardened at the name. "Seemed decent enough at first, had a job at the lumber mill, brought home regular pay, but he liked his whiskey and when he drank he got mean." She touched her healing face absently. "Started with Ma, then my brothers when they tried to protect her. My sisters and I learned to hide when we heard his boots on the porch steps." She paused, swallowing hard. 2 winters ago, Ma took sick, pneumonia. Without her to take his temper, Thomas focused on me." Wade moved closer, sitting on the porch steps below her, his back against the railing. "My brothers had already left by then, looking for work. My sisters married off as quick as they could, even little Alice, who was only 15, just to get away from him." Ruby's eyes darkened with memory. "After Ma died, Thomas decided I was to be more than just his punching bag, said I owed him for keeping a roof over my head." Wade's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her speak. "I ran the first time he tried, made it as far as Bozeman before he found me. After that, he kept me close, told everyone I was wild, needed a firm hand." Ruby's laugh was bitter. "Last week, he lost big at cards. Told the winner he could have me for the night to settle the debt." Wade's hand curled into a fist against his leg. "I fought back, grabbed his gun when he was sleeping off the whiskey. I just wanted to scare him, but he came at me and the gun went off." Ruby's voice faltered. "I ran. Kept running until I reached Willow Creek. I didn't know where else to go." Wade was quiet for a long moment after she finished. "Is he dead?" he finally asked. Ruby shook her head. "The bullet just grazed his shoulder, but he'll be looking for me. He doesn't like losing what he considers his property." Wade stood, his expression resolute. "He won't find you here, and if he does, he'll regret it." That night, something shifted between them. Ruby prepared supper, a rabbit stew with vegetables from Wade's garden, and they ate together at the small table, their conversation less guarded than before. "How long have you been out here?" Ruby asked, breaking a piece of cornbread. Wade considered the question. "Bought this place about 5 years back, needed somewhere to return to between cattle drives." He glanced around the cabin. "Never thought I'd end up staying, but each time I left I found myself hurrying back." "It's peaceful," Ruby observed. "Beautiful in its own way." Wade nodded. "My father was a restless man. We never stayed anywhere longer than a season when I was growing up. Always chasing the next opportunity, the next boom town." His eyes grew distant. "I swore I'd find a place to put down roots someday." Ruby studied him in the firelight, seeing past the tough exterior to the solitude beneath. "Don't you get lonely out here by yourself?" Wade's smile was slight but genuine. "Got my horses, books, the mountains for company," he paused. "But yes, sometimes." Their evening ended with Wade reading aloud from one of his books, Thoreau's Walden, his deep voice giving weight to the words about simplicity and self-reliance. Ruby fell asleep to the sound, feeling safer than she had in years. The following weeks brought healing, both physical and otherwise. Ruby's bruises faded, her ribs knitted, and she began to move more freely around the cabin and its surroundings. She took over more of the household tasks, not out of obligation but from a desire to contribute, to build something positive after so much destruction. Wade taught her to ride one of his gentler mares, showing patience as she overcame her initial fear. They explored the nearby woods together, Wade pointing out edible plants and animal tracks, sharing the knowledge that had kept him alive during his years on the trail. In return, Ruby shared her own skills. She mended Wade's clothes with neat, even stitches, prepared more varied meals than he'd been accustomed to, and even planted flower seeds alongside his vegetables, explaining that beauty had its own purpose. As summer deepened, so did their connection. Wade found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone about his first cattle drive at 16, the friend he'd lost in a river crossing, the time he'd been caught in a blizzard and survived only by sheltering inside his dead horse. Ruby, too, revealed more of herself. She told him about her dreams before life had hardened her of becoming a teacher, of seeing the ocean, of having a home filled with books and laughter instead of fear. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching a thunderstorm roll across the valley, Wade suddenly spoke. "I killed a man once." Ruby turned to look at him, but his gaze remained fixed on the distant lightning. "I was 22, working a drive up from Texas." Wade's voice was steady but quiet. "There was another hand, older fella named Harlan, mean as a snake and twice as venomous. Had it in for me from the start, though I never knew why." Ruby remained silent, sensing he needed to tell this story that had clearly haunted him. "One night, he caught me alone checking on a section of the herd that had spooked, started in with his fists, then pulled a knife." Wade absently touched a scar on his forearm. "I didn't want to shoot him, but when that blade came at my throat, I didn't have a choice." "You were defending yourself," Ruby said softly. Wade nodded. "Trail boss ruled it justified, but taking a life, it changes you. Makes you think about the value of things." He finally looked at her. "That's part of why I stepped in that day at the saloon. I've seen what happens when people only look out for themselves." Ruby reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing against his weathered hand. "Thank you for telling me." Wade turned his palm up, capturing her fingers in his. They sat like that, hands joined, watching the storm pass over, neither needing more words. The first time Wade kissed Ruby, it was unexpected by both of them. They had ridden to a high meadow filled with wildflowers, bringing a lunch of cold chicken and biscuits. Ruby had been laughing at Wade's tale of a particularly stubborn mule he'd once owned, her face tilted up to the sun, all traces of her earlier injuries now gone. Wade had stopped mid-sentence, struck by the transformation in her. The frightened girl from the saloon door was gone, replaced by this vibrant young woman whose strength had emerged like a seedling pushing through rocky soil. "What is it?" Ruby asked, noticing his sudden silence. Instead of answering, Wade leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, a gentle question rather than a demand. Ruby froze for an instant before responding, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. When they parted, Wade searched her face. "I shouldn't have." Ruby silenced him with another kiss, more certain this time. "Yes, you should have," she whispered against his mouth. "I've been hoping you would." They returned to the cabin later than planned, the air between them charged with new awareness. That night, Wade still slept by the fireplace, but neither of them found much rest, too conscious of the other's presence just a few feet away. The next morning over breakfast, Wade spoke directly. "Ruby, I'm not Thomas. I won't ever hurt you or force you into anything you don't want." Whatever happens between us happens because we both choose it. Ruby met his gaze across the table. I know who you are, Wade Armstrong. I've watched you gentle wild horses and nurse injured birds. I've seen how you treat people in town with respect, whether they're the banker or the blacksmith's apprentice. She reached for his hand. I'm not afraid of you. I'm only afraid of what I'm starting to feel because I never thought I'd feel this way about anyone. Wade's expression softened. We can take all the time you need. There's no rush out here. But life had other plans for their careful pace. Word reached Willow Creek that Thomas Wells was asking questions in nearby settlements, offering rewards for information about Ruby's whereabouts. The news came via Hank Patterson, a fellow rancher who stopped by Wade's cabin on his way back from a supply run. Nasty piece of work, Hank reported, accepting a cup of coffee from Ruby. Claims his stepdaughter stole from him and ran off. Offering $50 to anyone who can tell him where to find her. Wade's expression didn't change, but Ruby saw the tension in his shoulders. Appreciate the warning, Hank. After the neighbor left, Ruby paced the cabin, her hard-won sense of security crumbling. He won't stop looking. That's who he is, and when he finds me. She wrapped her arms around herself. Wade crossed to her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. He won't touch you again, not while I'm breathing. Ruby looked up at him, tears threatening. I can't let you put yourself at risk for me. Maybe I should move on, lead him away from here. Wade's grip tightened slightly. Running isn't the answer, we face this together. That night, Ruby came to Wade's bedroll by the fire, slipping under the blanket beside him. He stirred, instantly alert, but she placed a calming hand on his chest. I don't want to waste whatever time we have, she whispered. If Thomas comes tomorrow or the next day, I want to have had this night with you. Wade brushed a strand of hair from her face. Are you certain? Ruby's answer was to kiss him, her body pressing against his with unmistakable intent. Wade responded with a tenderness that belied his strength, his hands reverent as they explored her, his patience infinite as he waited for her signals, never presuming, always asking without words if each new touch was welcome. Their coming together was like finding shelter in a storm, urgent yet careful, passionate yet gentle. Afterward, as they lay tangled in the blankets, Ruby's head on Wade's chest, he spoke words he'd never said to another soul. I love you, Ruby Winters. Whatever comes, whatever we face, that won't change. Ruby raised herself up to look into his eyes, seeing truth there that banished her lingering doubts. I love you too. You made me believe in good men again. They were married 2 days later by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through Willow Creek. It was a simple ceremony at the cabin, with only Dr. Lowell and Hank Patterson as witnesses, but Ruby wore wildflowers in her hair and Wade had his boots polished to a shine. Didn't think I'd ever see the day, Dr. Lowell remarked as he congratulated them. Wade Armstrong settled down with a wife. Wade kept his arm around Ruby's waist, his smile uncharacteristically boyish. Neither did I, Doc, but then I never thought I'd find someone like Ruby. Their happiness was a fragile bubble in a harsh world, and they both knew it. Wade increased his vigilance, always carrying his rifle when they went beyond the cabin's immediate surroundings. Ruby practiced with a small revolver Wade gave her, though her hands trembled each time she held it, memories of that terrible night with Thomas making the metal seem to burn her skin. August turned to September, and the first hints of autumn touched the aspens near the cabin with gold. Ruby and Wade established routines as husband and wife, their closeness deepening with each passing day. They spoke of the future of expanding the cabin, of the children they might have, of the life they were building together far from the shadows of their respective pasts. Then came the day Wade had to ride into Willow Creek for supplies they couldn't produce themselves. He hesitated to leave Ruby alone, but their flour was running low, and winter would arrive soon enough. I'll be back before dark, he promised, kissing her goodbye at dawn. Keep the doors barred and the rifle close. Ruby nodded, trying to hide her anxiety. I'll be fine. The mountains haven't made me a coward yet. Wade touched her cheek. You've never been a coward, Ruby Armstrong. The name still sent a thrill through her, Ruby Armstrong. A name chosen, not forced upon her. A name that represented safety and love instead of fear and pain. She watched him ride away, then turned to the day's tasks: bread to bake, vegetables to harvest, clothes to wash in the creek. The work kept her hands busy, but not her mind, which kept straying to the road, counting the hours until Wade's return. It was mid-afternoon when Ruby heard the approaching hoofbeats. Relief flooded her until she realized it was too early for Wade to be back. And the rhythm was wrong. Multiple horses, moving fast. Ruby grabbed the rifle and positioned herself by the window, her heart pounding as 3 riders emerged from the tree line. The man in front made her blood run cold. Thomas Wells sat atop a bay gelding, his face flushed with exertion and probably whiskey, a bandage still visible on his shoulder where her bullet had grazed him. "Ruby girl," he called out, his voice slurring slightly. "I know you're in there. Time to come home and face what you've done." Ruby remained silent, the rifle steady in her hands as she aimed through the partially open window. Thomas dismounted, signaling for his companions, 2 rough-looking men Ruby didn't recognize, to spread out around the cabin. "You've led me on quite a chase," he continued, swaying slightly as he approached. "But Daddy's here now to take you home." "This is my home," Ruby called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "And you're trespassing. Leave now, Thomas." Thomas's face darkened at her defiance. "That's no way to talk to your father, girl. You always were disrespectful. Need to be taught your place." He moved closer and Ruby's finger tightened on the trigger. "One more step and I'll finish what I started that night," she warned. Thomas stopped, eyeing the rifle barrel. "You haven't got the spine to shoot a man in cold blood. Your mama raised you too soft." "Maybe so," Ruby acknowledged, "but I've changed since then, and I'm not alone anymore." Thomas's grin was ugly. "You mean that cowboy they say took you in? We passed him on the road to town." "He won't be back for hours," he glanced at his companions. "Plenty of time for us to remind you of your obligations." Ruby's blood ran cold. They'd seen Wade, which meant they'd deliberately waited until he was gone. "I have no obligations to you, Thomas, not anymore. I'm a married woman now." Thomas spat on the ground. "Playing house with some cowboy doesn't change anything. You're still mine by law until I say otherwise." "The law doesn't give you the right to beat a girl or sell her to settle gambling debts," Ruby replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Now get off this property before my husband returns. He won't be as merciful as I am." One of Thomas's companions, a lanky man with a pockmarked face, shifted uneasily. "Wells, you didn't say nothing about her being married. I ain't looking to tangle with no angry husband." "Shut your mouth," Thomas snapped. "She's lying. And even if she ain't, 3 of us can handle one cowboy." What none of them had noticed was the dust cloud approaching from the east, not from the direction of town, but from the higher pastures where the neighboring ranches lay. Ruby had seen it, though, and was playing for time. "Last warning, Thomas," she said, raising her voice slightly. "Leave now or there will be consequences." Thomas laughed and drew his revolver. Always were full of big talk. "Let's see how brave you are when." The shot came from behind them, striking the ground at Thomas's feet. He whirled, his face contorting with surprise as he saw Wade Armstrong emerging from the trees, rifle raised, his expression deadly calm. "That was your warning shot," Wade called out, continuing to advance. "You won't get another." Thomas recovered quickly, his gun still in hand. "This isn't your business, cowboy. The girl belongs to me. I'm her stepfather and legal guardian." Wade's blue eyes were cold as winter ice. "That girl is my wife, and the only thing that belongs to you is the 6 feet of ground you'll be occupying if you don't drop that gun right now." The 2 men with Thomas exchanged glances, clearly reconsidering their position. One began backing toward his horse. Thomas, however, was too far gone in rage and whiskey to recognize the danger. "Wife, you married my property without my permission." He swung his gun toward Wade. "I'll see you dead for that." The next few seconds were a blur of motion and sound. Thomas fired wildly, his shot going wide. Wade's return fire was precise, catching Thomas in the gun arm and sending his weapon spinning to the dirt. As Thomas howled in pain and rage, Ruby emerged from the cabin, her rifle trained steadily on the other two men. "Like my husband said, it's time for you to leave," she told them, her voice unwavering. "Take him with you and don't come back." The men needed no further encouragement. They helped the cursing Thomas onto his horse, their earlier bravado evaporated in the face of Wade's deadly competence and Ruby's unexpected backbone. "This isn't over," Thomas threatened as they prepared to ride away. "I'll be back with the law." "Stealing a man's stepdaughter, I have witnesses to what you did to Ruby," Wade interrupted, his rifle still trained on them. "The doctor who treated her, townspeople who saw her condition. You come back with the law and we'll see who ends up behind bars." His eyes narrowed. "That's if you come back at all. Next time I won't aim for your arm." Something in Wade's tone must have finally penetrated Thomas's alcohol-fogged brain. He glared at Ruby one last time, then spurred his horse away, his companions close behind. Wade maintained his position until they were out of sight, then hurried to Ruby, taking the rifle from her trembling hands and gathering her into his arms. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" Ruby shook her head against his chest, the tension of the confrontation finally breaking in a flood of tears. "I thought you were in town. How did you know?" Wade held her tighter. "I got halfway there and couldn't shake the feeling something was wrong, decided the supplies could wait another day." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Good thing I listened to that feeling." Ruby pulled back to look at him, her eyes wet but determined. "He'll be back. Men like Thomas don't let go easily." Wade brushed a tear from her cheek. "Then we'll be ready, together." He glanced toward the cabin that had become their sanctuary. "This is our home, Ruby. No one's going to take it from us." That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Wade voiced the thought that had been forming since the confrontation. Maybe we should consider moving on. Starting fresh somewhere Thomas won't think to look. Ruby was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Is that what you want, to leave?" Wade traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "What I want is for you to feel safe, to not have to look over your shoulder." Ruby propped herself up on one elbow, her face visible in the moonlight streaming through the window. "I do feel safe, with you, here." She touched his face gently. "This is our home, Wade. You said it yourself. I won't let Thomas chase us away from it." Wade studied her, seeing the strength that had been there all along, waiting for the right conditions to flourish. "You're sure?" Ruby nodded. "I spent years running from him, hiding, trying to make myself small. I'm done with that life." Her expression softened. "Besides, we have plans for this place, remember? The extension to the cabin, the bigger garden, maybe even a schoolhouse someday where I could teach." Wade pulled her close, marveling at how this woman who had arrived in his life so broken could now be his source of courage. "Then we stay and face whatever comes." "Together," Ruby agreed, settling against his chest, and they did. Thomas Wells never returned to challenge them, perhaps finally recognizing the futility of his claim in the face of their united front. Instead, Wade and Ruby Armstrong built the life they had envisioned, turning their small homestead into a place of beauty and purpose. By the following spring, the cabin had a new room added on, and Ruby's garden burst with vegetables and flowers alike. She began teaching reading to the children from neighboring ranches who had limited access to formal education, laying the groundwork for the school she dreamed of establishing. Wade expanded his small herd of cattle and horses, earning a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. The money he'd saved from years of cattle drives was invested wisely, providing security for their future. And when, a year after their wedding, Ruby told Wade she was expecting their first child, the joy that spread across his weathered face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He knelt before her, pressing his ear to her still flat stomach as if he might already hear the new life growing within. "Thank you," he whispered, looking up at her with eyes bright with unshed tears. "For what?" Ruby asked, running her fingers through his hair. For begging at that saloon door, he said simply. For trusting me when I said you were mine, for making me whole when I didn't even know I was broken. Ruby leaned down to kiss him, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. From that moment of desperate need at the Silver Spur's threshold to this quiet triumph of love over violence, they had forged something precious and enduring, a family born not of blood but of choice, of protection freely offered and gratefully received. And in the years that followed, as their children grew strong and confident in the shadow of the mountains, Ruby and Wade would sometimes sit on their porch in the evening, hands clasped between them, and marvel at the unlikely path that had brought them together. A bruised girl, a kind cowboy, and words that had changed both their lives forever. You're mine now. Words that had begun as protection and blossomed into the truest love either had ever known.